I think I will start now. Once again, I have no idea when OBS is actually putting me live or not with the freaking go live button. Regardless, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully, you can hear me. Hopefully, you can see my stream. This is MarkTech. I apologize for the slightly belated iOS 17 preview, which thankfully is also what Apple calls it. But I wanted to get a good experience with iOS and iPadOS and macOS Sonoma and watchOS 10. So I've tried basically all the beta stuff that Apple has released, and now I've been using it for about a week. And before you ask, yes, I have a developer account, so I was using it completely legally even before the betas became free for everybody else. So iOS 17. Now, I understand that my thumbnail is both provocative but also a little stupid, which is it great or is it basically not, right? And I always understand that it's never that binary, especially for something that is already pretty mature like iOS. And for any kind of release that doesn't have any one major standout feature, right? If Apple were to now advertise let's something like picture in picture was for iOS 14, or which version was it? No, was iOS 12? I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused here. Or like widgets, or for the iPad when split view became available. Again, please let me know when picture in picture became a thing on iOS. I think I'm confusing myself here. Regardless, iOS 17 does not have one such feature, but it has basically like a death by a thousand cuts approach by having a lot of smaller to medium sized stuff across the operating system. And when you look at WWDC, you will find a lot of what Apple has shown in iPadOS 17 is also included in iOS 17. So iOS 17 by itself is much larger than it seemed just during the keynote portion of it. And the reason why I have this peculiar setup, I think I've had it during one of my older videos, is because I really want to take individual features that Apple mentions, and then I will outline in basically in a notes format or in pages how I feel about that individual feature. And thankfully there's this nice like black canvas pages like basic, so I can basically build on top of that. That's pretty nice. So iOS 17 preview, blah blah blah. This is not like Vision Pro. I'm not reading out every little thing that Apple is writing down here. And let's start with the first, and that is phone. And to be more precise, I will call it contact customization, right? I think that's fair. British English versus US English. So, what do I think of this? Well, for one, I haven't actually tried it yet. I've played around with it. It was pretty buggy for me. Overall, so I haven't set it up, I should say. I've tried it. It was a little buggy. I wanted to come back to it once it works better. For context, I'm using it on my iPhone 13 Pro Max. So if there are other devices where maybe it works better, not because they are much more powerful, but sometimes with beta software it just happens to run better, even like on an older device. Please let me know what kind of experiences you have had with it. And to be honest, I would like to comment on it. Which, how does Apple describe it? Express yourself to friends and family with a personalized contact poster. Great, so contact customization kind of hits it on the head. Create a poster using your favorite photo or emoji and pair it with your preferred font. Add some color, and it creates a visual identity, basically. So, I have to say, like, I've seen like some reporting that this is basically like the iMessage blue bubble, but for phone calls, that basically by seeing who has like those full page contact previews and stuff like that, who has like big memoji and stuff like that, that it's basically the same thing, and that people who don't have it, either because maybe they have an iPhone that doesn't have iOS 17, or of course if they have an Android device, that it will lead to people excluding others. Even more nonsense. I have commented on the iMessage versus RCS saga time and time again, but this was just a particularly stupid take. I will be perfectly honest. This is a gimmick, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. When a system is so mature, it's not bad to have gimmicks and fun stuff, right? But it's fun. It's visually like interesting, but it's not something that defines my user experience. It doesn't change anything. But for somebody who also uses like watchOS 10, I will say that on the watch, it would look way nicer to have that kind of full screen experience. A lot of watchOS 10 is pursuing a more full screen experience, which is especially nice if you have a small screen, so that makes it doubly efficient in comparison to a screen that is already large and can fit a lot of stuff on it. So to me, this kind of stuff, it's interesting. It probably came up because people had like way more phone calls and stuff like that during the pandemic. But now, even with the pandemic being over, a lot of those features are now being baked in. And later, when I make a video about macOS Sonoma, I think I will hold on for that until like at least the second or third beta, because a lot of stuff is just simply missing yet. And I don't want to make a preview video where nothing is working yet as it should. Regardless, let's get back to iOS 17 and the first feature that Apple covers here. And I think it's kind of a weird place for Apple to cover this, because this was also like basically first during their keynote, and I don't think this deserves that much attention. However, given like Apple's like social standing, right, I'm not like, yeah, there's a part even of me that like looks at iPhones as like more premium and stuff like that. But overall, we kind of have to admit that there's a lot of system elements that just feel more curated, feel more like they feel less personal than maybe on Android, where you can like customize every button, but they feel more thought through, which is what Apple gives us. And this feature is sort of like in between. It's highly personal, but in a way that is instantly recognizable as something Apple. And I think that they've done it very well, but I just don't think it's necessary. And then again, this is not again a complaint. I think that there's a lot of stuff nowadays that isn't necessary, but is still nice to have. So my main criticism here is probably that it doesn't deserve to be the first thing shown on the preview site and in the keynote. Okay, next. Live voicemail. You can see a live transcript of the message. Is that basically all? Yeah, you get a real-time transcription of the message. If you have silence unknown callers turned on, unknown numbers will go directly to live voicemail, and it basically gives you like a preview of what the person is saying, so you can semi-accept a call basically, but not actually interrupting your current work. Forgive me for not having tried out voicemail transcriptions yet. Next, messages. Now, messages is actually interesting because I have seen some people criticize this design for iMessage apps, and I actually really like it. Now, some of the new buttons, especially like the photos like icon in the iMessages apps section, it kind of looks weird. It looks a little disjointed from the rest of the operating system. But I have to say, I like that iMessage looks way cleaner with that. It does create a few like extra tabs to get to some of those apps, but this is iMessage. I'm not usually in a big rush to add like stickers. When I add a sticker, it's something fun. I want to have the best user interface for it. So I will call this like very generally like iMessage improvements. And I have to say that they're well designed. The stickers, I've been using the stickers now. For some, you actually see my thumbnails, and they're usually variations on my memojis or animojis or whatever you want to call them. And previously, I had to actually send them to myself, screenshot them, and then through an app like Pixelmator, basically take it out. Or then with iOS. With like newer iOS versions, I could take a screenshot and then use like the removal feature from later iOS versions. I don't actually remember if it was iOS 15 or 16 that introduced it. It's getting all a little confusing now with 17 versions behind us, right? Or soon behind us. And then I could drag and drop it. And now I can do it automatically. Now I can do it right from the stickers. So it's very, very well implemented. It's very fast, even on the first beta. Usually, like a lot of the Memoji stuff is kind of buggy in betas. Even throughout iOS 16, it wasn't that great. And I have to say, it works really, really well. The check-in stuff, I actually haven't tried it. Once again, I don't have anybody else who uses iOS 17. Maybe I could try it even despite them being on iOS 16, but this is obviously something that is designed to work between devices with the latest software. To those of you who don't know, with check-in, your friend or family member is alerted when you reach your destination. If you stop making progress, it checks in with you, and if you don't respond, it shares helpful information with your friend, like the location, battery level, cell service status, etc. Any information that is shared is end-to-end encrypted. Again, this is also something that has been pronounced throughout the keynote and everything else, which is that Apple, of course, keeps on their focus on security and privacy. And so stickers are fun and easy to use. Just overall, again, I will not be including stuff that I haven't tried it, like the check-in. Catch in and swipe to reply. Swipe to reply is a killer feature, but it's obviously Sherlocked from other stuff. Like obviously in something like Telegram, which I used a lot over the years. Other apps have messenger apps have had that kind of functionality, but it is amazing to have it, and I'm really happy that it's finally there. Search filters. Now this is something, this is very interesting because I don't imagine that many people search as much in their messages as I do. And search filters, in my opinion, fix what was previously completely broken. And I'm not kidding you guys. Like, if you were somebody who actually tried finding stuff, like I could even like search directly in the person, like I knew I had that message in, and I could type in like 90% of what was said without any errors, without any missing commas or anything. And it just wouldn't find it. Or even if I were just typing in a word, nothing. Now it actually works. It's kind of amazing that it didn't work before. And it's one of those things that I would never even like care to comment on usually. But the fact that Apple has not just given out search filters, but just has improved search overall, that it actually works and find the messages that you might be looking for. Yeah, that is really great. And with the filters, it actually also works faster because you can more quickly like just tell it to not search everywhere, but only between people and maybe between like certain subjects. So that works really well. Location, really well. I will put that into like well designed across iMessage improvements overall. It now is way easier to see the location of somebody. It actually shows up right on top, which is really nice. Read an audio message transcription. This is once again something that I don't know if it's currently only available in English. And I would like to try it, but once again, I also don't have anybody else with iOS 17, so maybe I should like send a voice message to myself and see how well it does it. But I haven't tried it yet. So the stickers, this is all something I've already commented on, and in my opinion, something like stickers deserves like first place mention well over the phone improvements, but it kind of goes in line with the same thing I've mentioned before. Stickers are obviously not something that Apple has invented. And you can comment and respond to messages in other apps also through like funny stickers and funny GIFs, etc. And you can either embed it directly in the chat or even over a specific like message. So Apple definitely isn't first here, but then again, Apple also started this quite a while ago for themselves. So they aren't even first with this approach, even for themselves. But the new stickers rule lets you access all your live stickers, all your emoji, Memoji, and other sticker packs in one place. That's also really great. I don't use many like pre-compiled stickers from like third parties, but it works really well to now just put them in one folder, stickers from different apps. Well, previously you had to like go to each individual app and then try to remember which is the correct one. So yeah, this is much, much better. And in my opinion, this is also how it should have been from the very beginning. So yeah, well, nice to have continued improvements to chat and phone, but nothing's super groundbreaking. And just in general, I will put in like stickers, also something separate. Well, I actually don't buy into this being like super big. So I will just keep it with this here, that they're fun and easy to use. And they are well designed and integrated. And obviously, they're nice to have across the entire operating system, right? You can have them in an email. You can have them in a PDF document that you edit. I think this is like what, the Clips app? Or like in a markup, everything basically. But it again, I will also say, like, I am both too non-serious in my workflow to rely on like a lot of phone calls and stuff, but I'm also I'm too non-serious to rely on a lot of phone calls and stuff. But I'm also serious enough to not care that much about stickers. So I have been very positive about iOS 17 for a multitude of reasons, and one will come later on. But I will kind of have to say that those two headlining features, and now it's three because Apple broke up live stickers from iMessage, though I think they kind of were born in iMessage and everything else just benefits from it. But yeah, it's nice to have. They aren't in any way revolutionary, but I'm still happy, especially for like I have like a 10-year-old niece who I gave an iPhone. Like, of course, she will have a lot of fun with that kind of stuff, and even just showing up across the entire screen when I call somebody, or seeing like a big face or emoji from somebody that is calling me will be nice. It definitely doesn't make the experience worse. Now, FaceTime. I will try summarizing it as well in a silly way. So it's just FaceTime improvements. Record the video or audio message when somebody misses your FaceTime call. It's really helpful. I've always said that similar to like how you type in a message, nothing in the current operating systems, nothing in the current apps should just rely on basically like oh, live peer-to-peer connectivity. This isn't a YouTube live stream, guys, or like a Twitch stream. If I try to send them a video, basically a live stream of myself, I should also be able to just record something for them to enjoy later. It's similar to if I didn't have internet right now, I would record my video through OBS and then upload it a little later. So yeah, it's helpful. It's definitely not game changing, but it's cool. And this is actually interesting because we have things that were mentioned later on in macOS, and I definitely haven't tried them yet. I haven't had a FaceTime call in the last week. So you can like react with your hands to make like reactions like confetti, firework, hearts, etc. My private browser is logged. Okay. Why can't I use Touch? Okay, I can use Touch ID. It freezes after a time. Good to know. And you can use it now in Apple TV. Again, I consider this more like a tvOS feature, but everything that works together in Apple's operating system is quite nice to have. Helpful, but even better on macOS, because this is when you actually get like the really big stuff like the presentation modes, etc. And this is where I think we get to the fun stuff that I really love, even though I could also say that it's by no means necessary. And I actually think that standby is fantastic. I know that a lot of people will say like, oh, what? It's just a simple dumbed down experience. I have to say, it kind of reminds me why Apple is Apple, and why even with them being late, usually their features have like a sort of unique identity that just feels right. And it's not perfect yet, sure, but I have found it to be super intuitive, right? What I don't like it is that it does have a delay currently, but I will blame it on iOS 17 being the first beta. It's well designed, and again, this is also part of iMessage improvements, but I will be critical when I don't think Apple designed something right. Those of you who have followed me for a while know, for example, that I hate a lot of how Apple handles like a lot of like landscape orientation stuff on iPhone, or even how their messages like sometimes don't scroll right on the lock screen. So when I say it's well designed, it's because I actually believe it's well designed. I don't actually think that Apple does everything right by default. But like everything from like the super simple calendar, the big we see it somewhere here, maybe it's a little later on, like the big like red full screen clock is fantastic. I keep that next to myself. And it's also part of Apple's inspiration cycle, where they design something specifically for one device or one device category, like the Apple Watch, which is where this originated, and then they ask themselves, well, can we put it on like a larger screen? And the biggest disappointment that I have with standby actually doesn't have anything to do with iOS, which is it's a disappointment that this isn't yet on iPadOS, because I think there it would be even better. And this kind of leads me to believe that standby next year will be kind of a big thing. Like, I don't know if Apple will just put it on the iPad and be done with it, or if it will come out with like a HomePod with like an with like a screen, or maybe like an iPad with like a dockable audio station. Again, I'm not saying that this is something that I personally would buy, but obviously this would be something new and something very different from Apple, and standby very much lays a foundation for this. So could be used for new devices like HomePod with screen, or iPad with speaker docking station. And it should be said that the iPad doesn't need the speaker docking station to work well with like standby, because most iPads already have pretty incredible integrated speakers. But the docking station in particular would also be for charging it in a convenient way. This is, for example, why standby is being shown primarily with MagSafe chargers, even though, yes, I've heard that a lot of people wondered about that. It works perfectly well. Well, the phone is charging over Lightning, so don't worry about that. But it looks just much cleaner, much better if it's charging over a MagSafe device. And it has support also for like live activities and Siri, which we'll also get to, which is a disappointment, definitely. So, interactive widgets. Now, this is something that I've always been kind of vocal about, which is I think that widgets are kind of overrated, especially like on smaller screens. I think like widgets are great if you have a large screen and you can have a lot of them side by side. And sure, you can make the point that okay, you basically have like two apps here side by side, and then like info from the weather stuff. But if I really want to get into something, right, like reminders, for example, you can basically like check off a list from reminders, but you cannot, from for now, at least I believe, like make new reminders. And if you write a new note, it does like, yes, you have on iPad, for example, like that sliding in a little notes window. That becomes notes, and the same goes obviously for macOS. Can I invoke it from here? No. Okay, it doesn't matter. But so they're useful, but I don't think they're fundamentally that much more useful than they were before. However, individual ones, for example, like the music and the podcasts widget, are now much better because you can now just click on the play button and not have to go into the app. So they're useful and definitely more convenient, but they're by no means a full replacement for full apps, right? I think that's fair to say, which is when you actually go to Android and also like to the jailbreaking community, that's actually partially how a lot of widgets are seen, right? You can create a new reminder and then check it out off, and some apps basically can persist in a widget. This is not what Apple is doing. They are still pretty lightweight. They are designed to not kill your battery or anything. They are well designed. I have to give them that, but I'm not typing in well designed once again, because some of the animations are really nice. But again, I'm trying to tell people, like, if you think that widgets fundamentally now change how you use iOS, think again. This is what I'm trying to do. However, there's one thing that I like to mention, and that is big potential from third parties. Because I fundamentally believe that Apple is not going to go all crazy with interactive widgets, and kind of what we see here is kind of what we'll get. I mean, look at this. Interactive widgets gets like one panel and one explanation that is like, come on. That is super short. Apple does not fundamentally care about it as much as many in the community. However, when you look at third parties, and for example, when you look at like car control apps, or just even like, yes, this is something that Apple is showing, like home controls, but it was never that difficult to access home controls because of Control Center, which is what a lot of people like leave out. I don't know why you want to go to the home screen again, find a specific page where your home controls are, then swipe through all the different stuff, or make like a giant widget that has all your home control stuff. If you can just, wherever you are, swipe down from here and get Control Center, which if you set it up right, has like all your home controls. So this was like a little tangent when people are like saying, oh, it now revolutionizes home controls. No, home controls already work really, really well if you know how to use them. But big potential from third parties who obviously couldn't be integrated into something like Control Center. So if you have now, and Apple showed that in like a small like preview, which wasn't even directly centered around it, for stuff like the Lucid app, so you can pre-open your car, preheat your car. Now this would be mostly like reduced to like a few buttons, otherwise the developer would have to preload like most of the app functionality. And then it also makes me wonder, how does it work with authentication? Would it require for you to use Face ID again? So there are some questions I have, but I am excited for third-party support, because I do think that whatever Apple has already done is kind of as far as I imagine Apple taking it. Maybe in 5 years from now, when we have like even more powerful devices with even more RAM, even more efficient processors, then I think Apple might consider giving widgets even more functionality. But for now, I think it's basically as good as it gets, given Apple's like priorities. AirDrop. I have to say, like, I'll just call it AirDrop. Like, I love AirDrop. I think it's one of the most innovative, fantastic features across iOS, and it works so well as part of the overall ecosystem. And it's all a gimmick. I'm sorry. This is actually something where it's like, oh, swap numbers with AirDrop, and then again, like, no need to wander around the room tapping your phone with others, right? Who else remembers that quote? This is what Craig said about Samsung's feature, which was like basically AirDrop before AirDrop, but way worse. It required the NFC chips in phones to see each other, so you had to tap them to each other, and it was way slower than AirDrop at that time. It didn't work as well with large files. It didn't have as good like an interface. So yeah, like, my ass, no need to wander around the room tapping your phone with others. Now there's apparently a need to do that, which is, I understand you can also probably send all of that through regular AirDrop. I haven't yet found one for a name drop, but again, this is the first beta. But like, come on, like, why do that? Share with intention. There's a new way to share with those nearby. So I will say specifically, name drop is a gimmick. So share with intention. There's a new way to share with those nearby. Simply bring your phones close to each other to initiate the transfer over AirDrop. Again, what is the difference between like I still have to select a file, and if I have to tap them basically to each other, then suddenly I have my phone at like an inconvenient angle, and I'm basically bothering a person to get close to me, even though AirDrop used to work perfectly fine while we were apart. Again, I'm not saying AirDrop will suddenly not work that way, but this doesn't really improve anything. It's like, oh, now the phones have recognized each other, and maybe with like the U1 chip, it will work even faster. Great, guys, AirDrop was already plenty fast. And then again, once you step away from each other a little bit, it will be just as fast or slow as it was before. So so this is weird to me. Like, I have to say, like, whoever came up with this, I think they sort of ran with it, because it's not bad by any means. And like, I think name drop by itself is cute, but with the tapping mechanism, like, no, I don't like it. However, there's one thing I love, and that is finish sending through the internet is a game changer. This is phenomenal, because And if you're sending a couple of photos at a time, that doesn't matter much because usually you will have the time to send it. But if, for example, if you started sharing, like maybe you were at a wedding or at a birthday or whatever kind of large event, and now you're sharing like 100 photos and 15 videos, and nowadays it's like Dolby Vision 4K 60 stuff, and some of it might have been slow mo and some of it might have been like time lapse. It doesn't matter. I have found myself in that position actually quite a lot. And I actually have a contract with a lot of internet data. So instead of just stopping to work, which sometimes AirDrop, it's a wireless standard, it can stop working even if somebody doesn't like run away, but maybe there's a wall between you suddenly because somebody had to go to the bathroom, or I don't know, like maybe there's a lightning storm and there's electrical interference. It doesn't matter. This is fantastic. It will be niche in use, but whenever it's necessary to use it, I fundamentally believe that it will fix something that wasn't necessarily broken before, but I would say was missing before. So it adds something that is necessary. And I think that those features are kind of add-ons to that and not the other way around as Apple makes it look. But I haven't yet used it, so I hope that it works well. And I think over the next weeks and especially months, because this is said coming later this year, I'm kind of inclined to believe that that means that it's only launching once macOS Sonoma comes out. So iOS and iPadOS come around the same time, but then macOS comes out about a month later, and I think this is kind of what we should expect here. So it will. Though I do think that the iOS 17.1 beta will bring that like a week after iOS 17 actually launches. That's just my prediction. Instant SharePlay, I consider it part of AirDrop. Hold to iPhone. No, not really. It like depends. Samsung used to have like a cool feature where phones and stuff could like play basically the same music. I think this is more for like AirPods. However, the feature was crap, even though I just called it nice, because obviously those phones didn't have an understanding of each other, like, oh, like into which direction is like the speaker firing? Are the phones actually like really close to each other? It didn't matter, right? It was just basically like you playing the sound at least simultaneously from two devices, but there was like no smart speaker separation here or anything. And I kind of wish that this would do that, but it doesn't seem to work that way. It's just SharePlay. So play games in sync. Again, it's nothing that previously AirDrop didn't do before. And I go back to no need to wander around the room, tapping your phone with others. Well, apparently, yes, there is nowadays. Put the comma into the right place because I have OCD. I'm very sorry. Journal. That is actually something that we can do very, very quickly, which is, I think this can now go. Or can I add like an extra? I don't know. I'll just restart. Right. So journal. Not yet out. So the concept is a little weird by itself, because as I've said before, I've actually commented on it when we've had like rumors, and I felt in my predictions that it would have a much bigger focus on mental health, for example, but it seems to be more like an automatic diary, which makes sense. I mean, how does Apple describe it? It's a new way to reflect on and relive special moments. Capture your thoughts on life's big events or everyday activities. Add details to any entry with photo, music, audio recordings, and more. So it's a decent idea. However, it's some and the automatic stuff I think is why it exists, because obviously if you had to put in everything manually, it's kind of not too different from like making a note, or even like making a small keynote presentation out of something. So yeah, I like the automatic stuff. I kind of have to say that, like, I don't know how much this will be used. Like, Apple has spoken during the keynote about a new focus on mental health, and we'll get to that when we talk about the health app. But this is not what we see here, right? It's on-device machine learning, writes about your photos, music, workouts, and more. Like, it's nice. I don't know if it's in the zeitgeist, basically, if people do want to write journals a lot nowadays still. It definitely was in the early 2000s, and I'm not opposed to it, but because it's not yet out, I hope to see how people actually use it, and then I think I will be able to judge it. Will I do it myself to even test it out? Maybe a little, but definitely not enough to actually review it properly. Okay. Keyboard. Okay, now this is my cup of tea. Boring small updates that change everything. Autocorrect. Autocorrect is phenomenal. Did I type it right? Okay. Sorry, guys. It's like 2 in the morning. Autocorrect works fantastic. And as you know me, like, please, I know that there are some people tuning in who maybe think that I'm like an Apple sheep who never held like any other device in my hand except for an iPhone. Like, I use Android devices. I set up Android devices for my family and friends. I recommend Android devices to people who I don't think will be well served by iOS. And I use Android devices. Like, currently I don't have a secondary phone anymore, but I used to have one for a long time, and I used to actually switch between them for a while. But then, like, the 13 Pro Max was so big that half a year after I had it, I stopped using a secondary phone. And that was also the time when, like, during the pandemics, it was still a little difficult to, like, basically, like, share phones back and forth. Everybody relied too much on every phone they had. So I wasn't, like, too keen on taking away, like, anybody else's secondary phone. But I've even used, like, extensively now the Galaxy S23, not the Ultra, unfortunately, but I had a friend who has, like, the Plus model. Yes, the middle one is called the Plus model, and I use all my devices in English. So I'm actually getting the best experience possible, because all of those operating systems are designed primarily with English in mind. But autocorrect in general, like, in English, it's basically magic. And yes, I'm not saying it's like the predictions are actually not that extensive, and I think a lot of people have said that, like, oh, it's not like as impressive as what Google does in, like, Gmail, where they can, like, generate half an email for you. That's not what I'm looking for, but yes, predictions are so, right? They are nice to have, but they're definitely not in the same league as what, like, your chat GPTs are doing. But the autocorrect is so good, and the way it also now gives you, like, that little back button if you actually liked how you wrote it before, and just it also feels like faster somehow. It works really, really well. And I've seen also improvements through my German typing, but I haven't typed as much German over the last week, so I cannot comment on that as much. It remains to be seen. I do believe that currently it's using machine learning only for English, but it works well in German too. And then again, I also never had that many autocorrect issues in German as I've had in English for some reason. So yes, keyboard is phenomenal. Safari and passwords. This is actually something that I'm a little torn on because I've primarily tested it out on macOS Sonoma, and I kind of have to say I like the profiles. Like, profiles are a great idea, but they're currently not very well implemented. And I really mean currently. So I will actually type it. um, on macOS, on iOS, it works through like the settings app, how you set it up. The switching itself works well. So the design itself is okay. But on macOS, you actually do it a little more intuitively, I think, with like how you set it up. I have set up like a streaming thing for me, but for some reason I cannot separate like browsing history from the different profiles, and I kind of don't want to review it because it feels unfinished. It feels like they will add extra buttons to like the customization of profiles, but it's currently simply not feature complete. Like, the reason, like, yes, it shows like I can set up that it doesn't show favorite tabs. Okay, that's good. But maybe I have like favorites that I don't want like people to see while I'm streaming, right? I have a couple of websites that I use only for work. I don't want necessarily for people to see those. I have a couple of them that I use for like reading and watching stuff that maybe exist in a little bit of a legal gray area. I know, boo-hoo, right? But I don't necessarily want to use like my channel to advertise those websites. And then like just my regular stuff that I prioritize. I've set up a new streaming profile, and like a new profile, and I called it streaming. And I looked at what it did like by default, and by default it started including like shared with you stuff. Shared with you is something that I never turn on, basically. And now it was like by default enabled. I have no idea. Like, maybe Sonoma like reset my settings, and then the new streaming profile hijacked that. But it doesn't work well at all. Like, I cannot recommend it currently unless you're literally just using it to have a different sorting mechanism for your favorites. But my god, then, like, unless your favorites that you want to set up are somehow really private. Again, the reason why I want to keep it private from streaming is because I keep myself pretty private from streaming. You don't see like the folders and stuff I have on my desktop, not because they're filled with porn, but they're primarily filled with like a lot of work stuff. They're filled with a lot of like personal information, and I don't even want people to just see what the folders are called. Not because they're bad, but because I'm a private individual. And but everything else that I have on my device, like anybody who like I hand over my device, I pretty much don't have anything to hide, like any potential partner or my mom or a good friend. Like, sure, I would like to have like a guest account on iOS. That is an entirely different discussion. But to me, like, setting up those profiles, and while without having the option to fully customize everything, is weird. And this is the first beta, and I've tried it primarily on macOS, and I've tried it a little bit on iOS. Maybe I just didn't find the button yet, but that would also be kind of a problem if I couldn't find the button in what is basically like a 3-sentence like setting. So there isn't that much that I could have overseen. So yeah, it's currently not well implemented at all, but it's, again, we are talking about the first beta. Well, okay, so Touch ID works well. So, faster and more relevant search. Yeah, it's okay. I've tried to do that with like some sports results. I kind of have to say I'm not a the biggest fan. Like I've tried like the UEFA Champions League final, and Inter Milan and Manchester City, right? And I've tried to see the results, and it had like a lot of breakdowns, like who had better ball possession and stuff. But it's not like it was linking me to a website with a lot of great visuals for it, and I couldn't even see like scored the actual goal, which was weird because I know that feature actually definitely works in Apple's like sports previews. So again, this is probably also something to related to iOS 17. But yeah, like having that stuff, it's also in Spotlight search. So it's basically just Apple taking a feature from something else and implementing it to something else to advertise it once again. It's not definitely my most liked feature in iOS 17, to put it mildly. Enhanced private browsing is always welcome. So I will just call it privacy enhancements are always welcome. So yeah, I trust Apple in that regard. I know a lot of people try to conflate like all the big corporations, all your Googles and Microsofts and Amazons, and then try throwing Apple, and especially like Facebook and Twitter, and they try throwing Apple into that mix, and it just doesn't work. Like when you look at actual results from Apple, when you look like what money they actually get from any kind of data collection, which is pretty much zero. Yeah, like there are some stuff in terms of privacy that I have been critical about. For example, that Google is not just the default search engine, but that Apple collects money from it, and that Google is definitely not the most privacy friendly search engine. So that kind of is like a conflict of interest for Apple, where money definitely wins. But then again, I myself can still change away from Google, and I do not, right? Because I actually believe that Google asking for some data for fantastic results is kind of fair, but I just would wish that Apple was prioritizing privacy more by default in that way, kind of like how we see here. It locks your private browsing windows, which we have actually seen in action now, right? It completely, which is also weird because they're saying when you're not using them, but I'm definitely using Safari here. So again, first betas, right? Completely blocks known trackers. That I've actually seen, like some websites have stopped working to the point that you are now more often encouraged to reload them without any like tracking prevention and ad prevention. I do have an ad blocker installed usually, but this seems now to be working better than that ad blocker for trackers, not for ads. That is something different. And it removes tracking added to URLs as you browse. Okay. So this is, again, autofill verification codes received in mail. I haven't actually gotten to try it yet, but to anybody who's like a lot on like tech Twitter, this is actually great because this is usually like a part of this meme tweet, like whoever invented this feature deserves a raise, or like the best feature on iOS, and then we see that. So it's great to see that, right? It previously worked really well through messages. Most of those services, I would actually say, do rely on SMS, but some do rely on email, and it's kind of nice if it like reads it automatically to insert it right where you needed that passcode or verification code, to be more precise. That being said, I don't actually have my most relevant emails integrated right into the Apple's Mail app. I do have a lot of like Gmail accounts that I use through the Gmail app. So I will actually not benefit from it as much as one might think for an Apple user. And sharing passwords is very convenient, but then again, companies like Netflix are making it more difficult, regardless if you actually have the password or not. Music. Like, this is difficult for me to comment on because Obviously, I haven't yet experienced any kind of changes to CarPlay. A lot of it is like based on like SharePlay now, so it's easier for somebody like in the car to share something to the car, even if it's like not the primary phone that is connected to CarPlay, which is nice. But again, it's somewhat of a niche use that definitely isn't yet my usage. I live in the capital of Germany. It's kind of hard here to even find parking space, so I don't currently have a car. So if I find a reason to test it out, if I find a way to test it out, I will let you know. Collaborate on playlists, nice. Again, I'm not much of a collaborative guy when it comes to stuff like that. I prefer my stuff to be relatively private. My music as well. But there is something else, and like there's a somewhat improved like now playing screen, and it looks great. So improvements to now playing screen and the interactive widgets are very nice additions. This is what I would focus on. These aren't even like changes that Apple advertises directly in relation to music, but I think that those changes have kind of been most noticeable to me throughout my usage of iOS 17. AirPlay is very simple. Actually, I haven't been able to test out those changes. Those changes are primarily designed. Again, they're saying on-device intelligence learns your AirPlay preferences over time. I'm kind of skeptical about that. But it makes it easier to work with hotels. This hasn't launched yet, so I will just put it like no actual experience here. So yeah, I will be completely open. I have to say, like when you look in the control center and you have like all your like AirPlay sources and stuff around you, it now is like glowing blue on top if you have something that is actually playing. For me, that's usually my TV connected to my HomePod, and it does give it like some nice like basically like some extra liveliness, but it doesn't fundamentally change how I actually use it. But it does make it one click faster to add to like change volume or anything else like that. So that's nice, but it's not a big game changer. So that is like the one piece of experience that I have with newer AirPlay, but it's so insignificant I wouldn't even mention it. AirPods the same actually. I don't yet have the latest AirPods beta, and I don't actually intend to put it on them because it's simply too risky if something goes wrong. I don't want to deal with having to fix AirPods in any way. Quickly mute or unmute yourself on a call. However, I do like that. I like there's some cool stuff that is being done, and especially like adaptive audio. Man, I really want to test it. So it basically blends transparency and active noise cancellation modes, and it sort of dynamically switches between them depending on your environment. So if you have, for example, a very loud sound next to you, it will still go through most likely because transparency mode might decide that like this sound could pose a danger to you. So you need to hear it. But then through active transparency, it also knows to reduce the volume. And thanks to active noise cancellation, it now also has like the better technology to cancel the noise. And you just go through the park and a noise cancellation is on, and then somebody starts talking to you, and now transparency mode can go in. And again, also because there is so many like adaptive and active stuff, there's a lot of like machine learning here actually going on that I'm really interested to test out how well it works. But again, no experience whatsoever with any of the features. But I'm definitely excited to get those features whenever I can, and I wonder how well they currently already work. Maps. Oh god, maps. I love Apple Maps so much in comparison to many other people who still believe it has like all the problems from iOS 6. Offline maps, it better late than never, right? But it's very important that they are here. It sucked that they weren't. I still don't quite understand why it took them so long. But Apple is taking some effort, right? The interface for that is nice. It still does work well with like turn-by-turn directions. So I'm not super angry that it took them a while, but I'm angry that it took them way longer than a while. So yeah, obviously I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, but this should have been like here like 2 years ago or even earlier. EV vehicle routing or vehicle routing. You can now choose a preferred charging network and see real-time charging station availability. That is also very nice to have with like CarPlay. So this is really great. But again, no, I have no car. But if I buy a car soon, I will buy an electric vehicle. Siri. Simply not good enough. I'm sorry, Apple. I am always somebody who said that Siri historically has actually been low-key fantastic for stuff like like setting reminders, setting alarms, working with a lot of your system functionality, like sending messages, phone calls, telling you to open an app. And I've always said that even at like voice recognition works surprisingly well in comparison to many other devices. I would say partially it's also because Apple on average has better microphones than comparable devices, but that's a slightly different discussion. And I'm also somebody who's like a little skeptical of stuff like ChatGPT and like the big stuff. I don't need Siri to become like a super smart like generative AI feature. But Siri needs to have better general knowledge. Like it is so stupid sometimes when you ask it like questions, even when it comes to like it has like metric conversions, right? You can have like your kilometers and miles and your degrees Fahrenheit and Celsius, etc. But then you might ask it something more obscure, and then it suddenly doesn't know, even though it should. Like it had like problems doing it with Kelvin, which to anybody who knows how Kelvin and Celsius like compare, like this should never be a problem. And I feel like a lot of functionality that used to be here with like Wolfram Alpha, which used to be like Apple's like it wasn't like built by Apple, but it was something that Apple was leveraging. Like I feel like a lot of times where like Siri on previous versions would like at least try giving you some kind of result from Wolfram Alpha, maybe even in dumb cases Wikipedia, I feel like it more often gives up now. And I think that Apple is kind of rewriting a lot of Siri and has completely given. I see it's sort of similar to. Again, I'm not a big Tesla fan, but I do happen to know a little bit about Tesla. And I feel like there is this like full self-driving version of Siri, which is basically much better Siri, but it only exists currently for Apple developers. But then Siri is the autopilot that you get for free on Teslas included, and it completely sucks. It's complete trash. But and you are left in like perpetual waiting for like for an update, even if you like don't get the like even if you don't get like ChatGPT like functionality, you kind of expect to some similar features to trickle down to Siri, because a lot of it can work without harvesting a lot of data. Like again, like what I've just said with like Kelvin to Celsius, that's just one example. There's a lot of like broadly available knowledge that you don't need like deep AI to understand. If I ask Siri how far it is to some kind of planet, yeah, it seems to work worse than it did a couple of years ago. And I hate that, because that's simply not the trajectory that I wanted to take. And I feel like Siri also has like weird disparities between like what device you use it on, which is fine if you're talking primarily about content consumption. I know that like my Apple TV does things differently than my HomePod and my iPhone and my iPad, but I don't know. I feel like HomePod is usually like way dumber for like general tasks, and then it tells you to look at your phone, but then it's just web browsing results, and sometimes web browsing results aren't even like that, like the problem is like the web browsing results that you actually see in like the Siri preview, they don't have the kind of answers that you would actually get if you put that prompt right into a Google or Bing search, right? So you end up clicking on it and then having to almost like reload the Bing or Google website. I don't actually remember which one Google like uses by default, which Siri uses by default, and only then do you get a result. It went as so far as what do I have as one of my shortcuts? I do have Bing. Basically opening, and then I click like the voice button, and then I ask Bing, which with its like ChatGPT integration and Bing search works incredibly well. Like I can ask it like really obscure stuff, and you know guys that I'm not the biggest Microsoft fan, but respect where respect is deserved, and Siri definitely does not deserve it with iOS 17. I've always been a big defender that Siri works really well for the features that it was originally advertised for, but it feels like we've now had well over a decade of nothingness and even some regressions, and whatever small improvements we had were at a far smaller pace than any of its competitors. So, that's a shame. That's a shame. I don't want Apple to rush it. I don't want Apple to suddenly throw away their principles and have like engineers work on like ChatGPT alternatives and make their own search engines out of nothing. I know that that's not how resource distribution works, but Siri exists, and Siri definitely has a customer base, not just through like voice talk, but Apple does have features like Spotlight Search. They do actually work supremely well and better than similar features work on Android or on Windows, right? Like those system-wide searches. But Siri now must do what it learned to do, for example, for app predictions. App predictions through Siri, which is on-device machine learning, is phenomenal. So now Apple needs to take that extra leap, partner with some kind of search engine, partner with some kind of like either go directly to Google. God knows you have a good working relationship with them for like pushing the Google search engine, and ask them to integrate Bard into Siri, not by Bard taking over, but by Bard analyzing certain results that Siri believes it cannot solve by itself, similar to how Wolfram Alpha took over whenever Siri was too dumb. So I don't want Apple to like suddenly hand over all their data and all their expertise to somebody else, and I do want Siri to be the default, but it needs to earn that place, because currently right now everybody on iOS is better served to use Siri only for stuff like messages, reminders, calendars, contacts. Again, there's a lot, but anything that basically remotely includes the internet, and like general knowledge stuff, no. But it has like back-to-back requests. Who cares? Like it's simply like it's not good enough to handle back-to-back requests. That's part of the problem. If it was smarter, then back-to-back requests would be a nice addition. but currently right now I'm not really asking Siri to do like back-to-back requests. And what Apple is like even having here are not like contextual back-to-back requests. They're basically just taking away the need to say Siri again after they took away the need to say hey Siri in the beginning. I'm afraid my HomePod will now respond to me. No, okay, good. But like,
Okay.
Okay, hey Siri, stop. Sorry.
There's nothing to stop here.
You see? Well, granted, I should have said shut up. Hey Siri, shut up.
There's nothing to stop here.
So you see, it sounded actually quite angry. But the voices are great. Like, ever since they upgraded the voices, they do work kind of great. So yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm a little flabbergasted that this is even a discussion we need to have, that just how not improved Siri was. Spotlight actually has beautiful animations. The app shortcuts are now in top hit, which is fantastic. This is where they should be. The actual search functionality through the system has always been great, so I don't know how much has improved here, but it seems to be just working great as it ever did. It seems to be a little faster. iOS 16 seemed to have a little bit of like speed problem with Spotlight. iOS 17 definitely does not. So I don't know. Like, it also says like you can jump right to the favorites if you search for photos. It feels like something that isn't necessarily like driven by like deep machine learning, but like conveniences that Apple built upon like analyzing user behavior, which is also nice to have. I will not even mention Spotlight Search here because I don't see that many different improvements. So rich visual results is also something that I haven't really like been confronted with. Visual lookup. It's machine learning, so it definitely does more stuff than Siri, but I personally have to say I haven't encountered it yet, so I'm not talking it down or up, basically. So it is supposedly better at analyzing whatever you are seeing, and it now works in video. So I will just say this: it is nice improvements, but currently not much experience with it. I will not blame the feature with it. I've had like some prompts where it's like that visual lookup button sort of changed. But yeah, I also cannot always guarantee that it's something that you necessarily want over anything, right? It doesn't matter. Like, yes, Google might be a little better, but I wouldn't also rely on like Google's results to like necessarily like identify every flower or every breed of cat. And I also kind of have to say I don't know how necessary that actually is. Like, one thing I imagine, like, you going through the forest, you've been lost, and you use stuff as something like visual lookup, be it at Apple or Google or Bing or something like that, to identify if like a mushroom you found is edible. That's kind of how I imagine like how visual lookup would ever be like truly necessary. But okay, so but lifting up subjects is actually now, I don't know if it previously didn't work in video, but I think it sort of did. But it definitely is now advertised as working like this. But well, no, if it didn't have visual lookup, it shouldn't have had it. So yeah, it now works in video, which I definitely haven't tried, and I will admit that this is something that isn't just not me having experience with it. I apparently completely missed this. Even when I read this website a couple of days ago, I must have like scrolled through that it is basically like a sticker now, not just for visual lookup. Health app. Haven't tried it yet. I will not bring it up here because it's primarily for like for now mental health and now vision health, but have to simply say, without it being properly tested, without like people who actually have those kind of problems, I simply cannot comment on it. But it is nice that Apple is doing it. And then there are like continuous improvements to privacy and security, a new better lockdown mode, which I don't know like how much more lockdown it could be. There are new accessibility features in general, like assistive access distills apps and experience to essential features, which makes them far more easier to use for people, especially with like either like heavily impaired vision or maybe like mental health problems. So that's actually great. Yeah, there are new emoji. I have actually seen that. Reminders, notes. There is now more enhanced like PDF capabilities. So it can, for example, I myself have been using an app called PDF Expert for years. And I think it can replace something like this in a rudimentary way for many people, but if you actually take your PDFs seriously, I still think that you should have some kind of like semi-professional app. Though what I do think this will have an effect on is I do think that a lot of apps on the App Store, etc., will now be forced to offer far better like PDF functionality, either for free and then have like maybe some kind of ads or anything or something like that, or for much lower prices. Because if you can get it done here, I think a lot of apps will now have problems convincing people to buy like their expensive versions, or even like pay like subscriptions. Fitness app has like a redesigned sharing tab. Okay, I haven't yet seen that. All my fitness stuff has been happening through WatchOS 10, and WatchOS 10 by itself is nicely redesigned. So that's different. Share AirTag or Find My Network accessories. That actually is fantastic because I know, for example, that I've been giving out like AirTags as gifts for a while, and people, I don't know, in the beginning struggle with using that stuff, so they sometimes text me like, where is that accessory or something. They used to, now they mostly figured it out. But if I could just set it up, and for example, like my nieces are like have like AirTags that my cousin manages, so I think this is something that I also would like to see, just to always make sure that everybody is safe. So yeah, there are some improvements. There are even like a freeform app, and there are like new crossword puzzles and Apple News. Again, I don't use Apple News Plus because it's not even available in my region. And just for a small breakdown, iOS 17 is available on the iPhone XS series of devices, I would actually say, and up. The iPhone XR obviously being like the cheaper alternative to the XS, and then everything else is newer, like the iPhone SE, the second generation, has an A13 chip, so it's actually technically newer than the XS, and then everything else has like at least the same 3 gigs of RAM as the XR. Most devices actually now have 4 or then 6 gigs. So yeah, I'm really happy that Apple is actually, and I know this is such an unpopular opinion, I'm happy that Apple is okay with cutting off devices after 5 years. I do think that maybe like the XS could still handle a new update like next year, so it would technically get 1 year more support than the 10 and 8 series did. But the reason why I'm a little like kind of elitist in this attitude is because Apple still provides security updates for older devices way beyond 5 years, often way beyond 7 or 8 years. And I do kind of think that 5 to 6 years of different devices, because it's not like just one device. It's not like iPhone 4 and 4S and then 5, right? No, each generation now has a 10R, a 10S, a 10S Max, and 11, 11 Pro, Pro Max. Like with the 12 series, now you have 4 devices: 12 mini, 12 Pro, 12 Pro Max, and the same goes for the 13 series, and now we have the Plus versions. So a lot of people try to dumb down iOS updates and just system OS updates in general to is a device powerful enough, right? Does it have enough RAM or something like that? This is not actually true. Whenever you make big changes to any kind of software, and again, I'm not a developer myself, but this is from what I hear. Whenever you do big changes to any piece of software, compatibility can suffer. And yes, it can. There are actually like really objective effects like RAM, storage, but also like just the specific generation of processor that you're addressing. Basically, maybe a next gen processor is only 20% faster, but with enough architectural changes, suddenly your software works 40% faster on it. And that suddenly means that the older generation processor now has to put in a lot more work. It will potentially can overheat. It will potentially eat up much more battery. And it can simply just create more bugs. And it's not like Apple is updating iOS 17 once, right? Like it's not like Apple could just, okay, we are bringing iOS 17 to the iPhone 10. Let's say we even exclude like the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone 8, and that's it. But that's not true. Like beyond that, now Apple has to make sure that as many features as possible work on it, because a lot of the features that we have talked about rely on machine learning. Now, the iPhone 10 does have a neural engine. However, that neural engine is way slower than on the 10s. Everything from the 10s had like a relatively like logical progression. Okay, this was like 50% faster, 40% faster, blah blah blah. But from the 10 to the 10s, the step was so big that you can basically reduce the neural engine of the iPhone 10 to one purpose, and that is Face ID. Because the neural engine is what handles Face ID together with the secure enclave. It also recognizes like changes over time, like you growing a beard, for example. So, or you just changing glasses or something like that. So the iPhone 10 basically doesn't actually have any like real resources for handling like machine learning stuff. It only happened with the A12 chip. So a lot of the things that I've actually praised more than everything else, for example, like the new autocorrect feature, yeah, that suddenly wouldn't be either possible at all in the iPhone 10, and that sometimes happens. I will be completely truthful. Apple sometimes just doesn't port certain features to older devices. But then how much is honestly left, right? It's like all of those features that I actually haven't been like super positive about, like the phone preview, the contact previews, and like the smaller changes to the iMessage design. Again, it isn't really worth for Apple to port that stuff to the iPhone 10 if so much of the identity of iOS 17 will simply not be ported. And that is partially why I've said that maybe some apps across iOS should more be like App Store updates rather than full system updates. But then again, they also rely on fundamental like privacy and security foundations that are built directly into the system. That's why they usually are actually pretty fast and pretty reliable. So without trying to end on like a super elitist note, I'm actually happy with the list, and I hope that this list stays pretty much the same. Maybe Apple can start removing like the iPhone SE more for like screen size reasons than anything else. But I'm really happy that Apple knows where to cut off, but still deliver like industry leading long-term support. And this has been my breakdown of iOS 17. Now, we could go into iPadOS, but this video is already way too long. And most features that we have covered in iOS 17 are what also define iPadOS. There's some extra stuff there, and some features are covered in more detail, like the PDF editing. I don't think that that's necessary what we need to cover here. Fundamentally, what I really wanted to give you was my overall experience with iOS 17, which is it's fast. It actually has good battery life, especially for a first beta, but also in general. It's reliable. I didn't have many crashes or anything after the first day. Again, the first day is usually the least stable. So a lot of people who like try to do like previews on the first day, they're usually a little effed because the system is still like setting itself up. There are a lot of resources like dedicated to it. A lot of nice to have features. Very few must-have features, but a lot of nice-to-have features. So I will put it in a more positive light. It's customizable, right? We didn't go to iPadOS, but iPadOS customized. What's wrong here? How is it supposed to be? Okay, I'll put this spelling. I have no idea. It's customizable with even stuff like the standby mode. You can put in like which widgets do you actually want to see, and then on something like iPadOS, it inherits a lot of the iOS 16 lock screen customizations, and that obviously also makes it nice as you move from one device to the other. And macOS now also has like full screen, like basically like home screen widgets, which was introduced in like iOS 14 and 15 and then iPadOS 15. So there's a lot of stuff that is migrating to other devices that makes it much better to have on every device, because now you're used to having it on every device. So I really like that. Like the ecosystem is strong. I know it sounds like some kind of like gorilla statement of like Kong strong, but I actually believe that a lot of the ecosystem updates like AirDrop, AirPlay, SharePlay, as much of I could consider some of them pretty niche, it's good that a lot of it is getting updated and that Apple just keeps paying attention to it. Siri, completely underwhelming. Like, I will be completely honest here. In a year where like everybody else talks for like 5 hours about AI, it would have been nice to even get like 5 minutes specifically for Siri, but everything else kind of makes up for it, because I would still also wager that most people don't use Siri or any kind of voice assistant as like a primary user interface element for the system, unless we are talking about like smart speakers and like those like Google Nest hubs and stuff like that. For now, I think that's okay, but iOS 18 definitely needs to drastically improve Siri. And if I'm being honest, I think that we should probably have like iOS 17.2 or 0.3, where Apple makes like a solid introduction to a new, like much smarter Siri. Everything else, it has no redesign. Like some things are redesigned, but like, so I should call it like no major redesign, and no like certainly like no major system redesign, right? Like some individual apps have seen changes. and that's actually okay. But I know there's a lot of people are waiting for it, and kind of looking at WatchOS 10, I'm kind of two minds, right? I do want iOS 12 like updates that primarily focus on security, on stability, battery life, performance, even giving out like yet another year of OS updates for older devices. That's nice, but when I look at some of the changes in WatchOS 10 and how much Apple can change after a decade of learning, I'm kind of inclined to say that iOS does need a little bit of that like forced redesign where some things are changed because basically the higher ups are telling you to change it, but then the actual developers and designers, they now implement ideas that they've been learning on, that they've had like collected data about, like even consulted psychologists and stuff like that for years, but they couldn't implement it without like changing all of the system around it. For anybody who remembers that iOS 7 was actually a super quickly developed OS, that's partially why it was actually pretty buggy in the beginning, but it was designed in only like 9 months. And in my opinion, we kind of need that, but with more preparation. And I think that Apple is now a solid foundation. They have a very mature operating system. They have like a lot of ecosystem strengths. So even if like they can like tone down iOS 17 and like not deliver any like major stuff through iOS 17.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, who knows, but instead just put all of their development into making iOS 18 a potentially big redesign, maybe with like even a big focus on Siri, and they could like even like rename Siri. I would argue that that wouldn't be a bad idea for marketing purposes. Hell, they could call it freaking Apple and then have it be like the Apple Assistant and make it something that they're proud to put their name on it. Just saying. So no major system redesign, though there are obviously things that changed. And I do believe that we are now over a decade after iOS 7, and it's kind of time for those improvements. Not every redesign is necessarily a big improvement, but I would wager, given how maniacal Apple is in like testing every feature before actually releasing it, even if that doesn't always pan out, as we've seen like with Stage Manager and a lot of people disliking it, I'm very inclined to believe that any big redesign that we'll be getting maybe next year or maybe the year after will actually be a very successful one. And there's a lot of stuff that would need to change, right? Like we just introduced Standby, doesn't need to change. We just introduced a new phone like contact screen, doesn't need to change. But Control Center, we've had that for a while. It feels a tiny bit out of place with a lot of other system elements. Kind of now needs to change. Like some system apps could also use like a little bit now changes. Now we have like this kind of like new design for iMessage apps. Kind of would be nice to have like a lot of like those translucency elements focused more in something like notes. And we now have Vision OS, so maybe some design stuff could be ported from Vision OS. Yeah, and there's one last thing, and this is not something that we'll find on Apple's website, and that is currently no concrete info on site loading. Now, I have given my rants on site loading and whether it should be here or not. I've explained time and time again that I'm very much of split minds here, and that I don't judge either side for sometimes being a little absolutist, even though I am definitely not. But it would have been kind of nice, like we've got like an interview where I believe it was Craig who said that like they could comply with EU regulations, and yes, there are alternatives, like they could be paying like a penalty. Though, oh my god, if they further increase prices in the EU because of that, I think I would start importing my iPhones from the US. I think that is when it will start making a ton of sense. Even if it gets like another 5% more expensive, it will just be crazy in comparison to the prices that they should have in here in Europe. Regardless, so we currently have no concrete info on site loading, and we kind of have no info, right? Because sometimes when it comes to site loading, we are talking about just generally downloading stuff from the internet. But what if Apple's only allowed us to download stuff like Steam or Epic Games Store, right? But then again, they would allow us to then download whatever is on those stores, so it kind of defeats the purpose of like manage what kind of like third party stores you could have, which ironically is kind of what Epic actually wants. Like Epic doesn't actually want people to sideload stuff, they want more people to use their own store, but that's also another discussion, as we almost like, I don't know how much we approach, like how long has the stream been? Oh my god, it's been 1.5 hours. I'm so sorry. And I know that nobody will be watching it after seeing how long it goes. So yeah, this has been a little chaotic, and I hope that you could still take some info from it. But yeah, this is those are my impression from iOS 17. Now I've commented on all the features individually. iOS 17 for first beta itself is actually quite recommendable. I still would recommend mostly people wait for the public beta, but nowadays you actually can install the dev beta without any like illegal workarounds, or even without paying the dev penalty basically. So it further improves customization, especially when you also take it into consideration that iPadOS is basically iOS 17 and that macOS Sonoma is part of the ecosystem. There are some individual elements that keep being a problem from year to year. Like not having a redesign kind of started to show its age at like iOS 15, I would argue, because we've had like widgets introduced, and then after that we had like widgets on the iPad, okay, and then we had like customization for the lock screen, but then again, how much time do you actually spend on the lock screen in comparison to all your regular apps? So yeah, like a system redesign would be welcome at this point, but I will not criticize iOS 17 for not being that. And there's currently no concrete info on site loading. Doesn't mean that we aren't actually getting it, but we certainly aren't getting it in a beta, I would say. I think if we are getting it, we are only getting it by the end of the year, actually. Maybe only once macOS Sonoma comes out. I don't know when the concrete timeline is for the EU, if they have like some kind of maybe like a timeline that could be like, okay, if you promise to introduce it at that time, then we still give you a couple of months to postpone it or something like that. And I don't know again how open the system actually has to be, like if it could work with only third-party app stores, or if it needs to be opened up completely to all like downloads from the web. So I will remain skeptical on if we get it and how, in what form we get it, but I do believe that at least in the next year or two we will hear about site loading, because that is also when, like, I think that this is when Apple might not even comment on it in a keynote, and we've gotten like a little info like through an interview. But I think the time will come when they will have to make some kind of bigger statement, especially if maybe like the EU forces them, right? And maybe they will start to have it in the US, and then obviously they want people to know what their OS wants them of. So this will be interesting to see, but I do not expect anything before iOS 17 actually launches, and maybe even beyond that. So that's it. This was my iOS 17 preview, me commenting on the features that I've experienced myself, but also on the features that are just part of iOS 17 and maybe are either not even fully in the system, like the Journal app, or features that I simply cannot experience because they need to be integrated with somebody else, like AirPlay in hotels, or maybe features that I can test because they require somebody else having iOS 17 devices, like name drop and stuff like that. So it's obviously a mixed bag of how much I actually can talk about, but I do like iOS 17, and to finish it off, I would actually give it a B plus. Now, why is it overall a B plus? Because there are individual features like stickers, like the standby mode, that I actually really like, and then there are individual, like, super small elements that actually change my appreciation for the overall OS, with something like a much better autocorrect, which, as I've said, works better than comparable Android devices. I think I lost my train of thought originally when I talked about it. I was mentioning those other Android devices because I've tried autocorrect on so many devices, but I have to say this is now the best autocorrect system, and it's a big part of the experience for me. And everything else are like nice gimmicks that I can imagine playing with, especially as I explain them to my nieces or some other friends. So I'm definitely not complaining. So the primary complaints really come from Siri, wanting some changes to a few system elements that might have grown a little stale. But overall, I'm still very happy with what is happening. I am also somebody who is much more positive on iPadOS because the foundation for iOS for iPadOS updates is basically iOS, so I cannot complain. And I am not somebody who screams that the iPad should become a Mac. But this is a discussion for another time, because this video is now 2 hours long. What is happening? I think Safari basically killed itself currently. I think this is actually a good moment for us to stop. Please let me know if you have downloaded iOS 17. Please let me know how it behaves for you and on which device. Please let me know if you enjoyed this video and what kind of video you would like to see me do next. And just in general, this is Mark Tech being so insanely grateful for anybody who tuned in. I think we had like 6 or 7 people watching at some point. Again, you guys are free to comment. I will respond to comments. But I understand that some of you are shy as well. So this is Mark Tech saying thank you and see you guys next time.